Good morning, everybody. I'm Pat Jones, the Executive Director and CEO of IBTTA, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to our webinar called When Weather Hits, Managing the Risk of Natural Disasters. We have about 60 people registered for this webinar today. Before we start, I'd like to note a few upcoming events. First, we have the Transportation Finance and Mileage-Based User Fee Symposium, April 14 through 16 in Philadelphia. That meeting will be immediately preceded by IBTTA's Board of Directors meeting on April 12th and 13th, and also a meeting of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance on Sunday, April 14th from 1 to 5 in the afternoon. On May 19 through 21 in Portland, Maine, we have our Operations and Maintenance Workshop, and we also have our Organization Management Workshop called Stories from the Front Lines on June 23 through 25 in Baltimore, Maryland. You can see all of these events on IBTTA's website. Some people have asked questions about obtaining professional development hours for this webinar. We're happy to give you a certificate for attending the webinar, and it is up to each individual participant to submit it to the appropriate accrediting group to obtain credit. If you'd like to receive a certificate after this webinar, please email Kathleen Davis at kdavis@ibtta.org. Well, here's the process today. We're pleased to have two highly regarded presenters, Megan Mulcahy from the New Jersey Turnpike Authority and Mike Smith of AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions. The presentation portion of this webinar will take about 35 minutes and will be followed by Q&A. You may also ask a question at any time using the questions dialog box on the right side of your screen. Also, please feel free to join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #TollRoads. That's the # followed by the one word toll roads. We'll monitor questions throughout the webinar, but will not address them until after the presentations have been completed. If any questions are not answered during today's session, the presenters will work on them after the webinar and will post the responses in the next 48 hours. We will post the slides and audio portion of this webinar on our website by close of business today. As I mentioned, we have two excellent presenters. Let's meet them now. Megan Mulcahy joined the New Jersey Turnpike Authority as the Chief of Staff in September 2010. In this role, she assists the Executive Director in the daily and long-term administration of the Authority, including coordination and prioritization of policy, strategic planning, and special projects. Before joining the Turnpike Authority, Megan spent 5 years as the Chief of Staff in the Office of the New Jersey State Inspector General, where she conducted numerous investigations and reviews of state entities that led to the recovery of millions of dollars in state funds, personnel actions, and numerous other remedial actions. Before that, Megan served in a variety of senior leadership roles in the public sector on both the state and federal level. Also joining us is Mike Smith. Mike saves lives, property, and profits by applying weather science and technology to real-world problems faced by business and society. Mike and his team have saved hundreds of lives and prevented more than $200 million in damage due to extreme weather. Whenever we're viewing color radar, a color newspaper weather page, or a GPS-powered storm warning display, we almost always run across one of Mike's many innovations. Mike speaks frequently to and consults with businesses across North America, helping them to effectively deal with weather's extremes. Mike is the author of 2 books and the recipient of numerous awards and patents. And so Megan and Mike, thank you for being with us today. Megan, let's begin with you.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank Pat, Rachel, and the IBTTA team for the invitation to participate in this webinar and for the continuing opportunities to discuss our experience as it relates to Sandy and other weather events. You know, the benefit of an organization like IBTTA is their willingness to host these events so that we can share ideas and experiences for the better of all of our agencies. For those of you listening, let me just try and advance this slide here. Can you advance to the next slide? Oh, there it goes. For those of you listening and perhaps less familiar with the New Jersey Turnpike Authority, briefly let me note that back in 2003, the Turnpike Authority consolidated with the former New Jersey Highway Authority, which ran the Garden State Parkway. So, since 2003, the consolidated New Jersey Turnpike Authority has operated and maintained these two toll roads, two of the busiest in America. As you can see on the map, both roads are primarily north-south routes, and the Turnpike is a key part of the I-95 corridor, providing a critical link to the economic centers of the East Coast. The Parkway runs through many towns in New Jersey and is the key roadway to get to the Jersey Shore. In the 2.5 years I have been here, we have experienced blizzards, hurricanes, an earthquake, nor'easters, and more Clipper system weather than I would care to count. To put our snow work into perspective and the changing weather over the last 3 seasons, which is usually late October through March, during the 2010 to 2011 season, we recorded 12 snow events, and last year we had 9 events. This year, we've had 28. While we haven't necessarily had significantly more total snow accumulation this year as compared to previous years, we have had twice as many events where our maintenance crews were required to be out on the road salting, spreading, or plowing, and our operations center to be fully staffed. We really have been nonstop with weather since Hurricane Sandy, and that's tiring to your resources, not to mention a cost to the agency. Extreme weather planning has become part of the regular planning of our agency. For example, 2 weeks after we experienced Hurricane Sandy in late October, our area was hit with a nor'easter that brought several inches of snow. We are a transportation agency, but weather planning and weather effects have become increasingly more prevalent in our agency planning. Potential weather impacts need to be considered when discussing budgets, infrastructure, equipment, construction schedules, personnel, and operations. So essentially all primary areas of the operations of the authority. You know, some have called Hurricane Sandy a 50-year or 100-year event, but unfortunately, given the destruction one storm created, the Jersey Shore infrastructure and its beaches need time to rebuild and repair, but as we all know, weather doesn't wait. So smaller storms with perhaps soaking rains or medium winds that would otherwise be minor to moderate in the power outages and flooding they cause, now cause much wider power outage issues and major flooding because the areas haven't been able to rebuild and secure themselves. For purposes of this discussion and weather risk, I thought it might be appropriate to talk a little bit about how we prepared for Hurricane Sandy and tried to anticipate the weather using available resources. Cheryl, can you flip to the next slide? Because I tried a couple times while I was speaking and it didn't go. Thank you. When we are faced with a weather event, whatever type of weather it is, we look at our preparation efforts and action items from 3 different phases: incident preparation pre-storm, incident phase during storm, and post-incident recovery. So with respect to incident preparation phase pre-storm, as it relates to Sandy, we began receiving advisories from our weather service a week prior to actual landfall that there was the possibility of this weather system impacting New Jersey. Those days leading up to the arrival of the hurricane were spent discussing and coordinating activities among each department of the authority, and I'll discuss some of those specifics in a few moments. Now, incident phase during storm, there comes a point when you need to just ride out the storm, and ensuring safety of your people and your agency assets is number 1. So you pull your people off the road and you prepare for recovery. Then you move into post-incident phase recovery. What's the goal? To get to normal as fast as possible, right? So that's when you begin your assessment of the infrastructure and any damage it sustained, and you prioritize your work. Next slide, please. Okay, so Hurricane Sandy weather planning, what tools did we use? As I mentioned earlier, we started discussing this potential weather system a week before it arrived. We consulted with our weather service, the National Weather Service, NOAA, the Hurricane Center, and other agencies to discuss possible scenarios and impacts to our region. We had the experience of Hurricane Irene back in 2011, so we reviewed that experience. But as we all know, no 2 storms are going to be exactly alike. So we also took historical experience and information into account in our preparation and coordination. By Thursday, October 25th, about 4 days prior to anticipated landfall, we had interdepartmental preparedness meetings occurring, conference calls with other state agencies, and emergency management personnel. This is also about the time we began reviewing tide charts for tidal flooding potential. Over these next several days, the forecast became more certain that Sandy would make landfall over New Jersey. So our personnel started studying estimated storm surge models, which are known as SLOSH maps. SLOSH stands for sea, lake, and overland surge from hurricanes. We looked at maps for Category 1 and 2 hurricane surges and used those in conjunction with the then current surge estimates and rainfall predictions that the Weather Service was providing. Can you move to the next slide? So here's an illustration of a SLOSH map with the flooding potential. So for example, the Weather Service estimated that we could experience 10-foot surges along the coast based on the storm strength and tides. And to complicate matters, there was also a full moon occurring at the height of the storm. To approximate which areas of roadway would be at the greatest risk of flooding during a Category 1 hurricane, our Turnpike analysts used the 10-foot surge prediction in conjunction with Category 1 SLOSH maps and then measured the elevation along the length of roadway in those mapped areas. So any elevation that was below 10 feet was considered to be at risk for flooding. And you can see on the map, given the parkway's proximity to the shoreline in the Atlantic Ocean and the projected path of the hurricane, the parkway presented a greater vulnerability to flooding. With our mapping research, we were able to monitor those areas closely. We also discussed our projections with hydrologists from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to confirm the areas we considered to be at risk given latest forecasts. This was an exercise that was continually evolving as forecasts are always updated and the storm track became more certain. This information was also useful in the staging of our roadway equipment. We have a few maintenance yards in low-lying areas or near waterways, so we made a decision to move equipment out of those districts into areas of higher elevation prior to the hurricane. Also important is wind velocity monitoring. It's important to know what your hazard assessment thresholds are and to communicate them to appropriate personnel in advance of the weather. For the Turnpike Authority, we used sustained winds of 39 miles per hour as the standard for pulling people off the road. You also have to consider wind thresholds for securing objects, construction sites, equipment, and facilities. You know, at what point could objects become flying projectiles? In advance of Sandy, we had all construction sites and facilities secured well prior to the start of the deteriorating weather. We knew there would be the significant winds, so we also had to consider what resources we would need to mobilize to deal with downed trees and electrical wires. This meant getting contractors and our record crews on standby so we could address those issues immediately in recovery phase. You also have to consider potential evacuations that might be ordered and how that impacts your roadways. Do we need to implement a contraflow plan? Will we need to suspend toll collection? And if so, when? All of these operational considerations are part of the weather discussion. So you have to make sure everyone is coordinated and communicating with the most up-to-date and accurate information possible. At the Statewide Traffic Management Center, where our operations group resides, alongside operations personnel from the New Jersey Department of Transportation, New Jersey State Police, and New Jersey Transit, our motto is prior planning prevents poor performance. Communication and coordination of agency personnel among your agency and with adjacent agencies is going to be essential to your proper planning. We suspended toll collection on the Garden State Parkway in the northbound direction between milepost 0, which is all the way down in Cape May at the southernmost point of New Jersey, up to milepost 127, which is in central New Jersey Woodbridge, almost where the Parkway and Turnpike cross over one another. We did this a full day prior to anticipated landfall of the hurricane, and it was done in an effort to assist in the evacuation of those areas that were under either mandatory or encouraged evacuation orders. The planning we did with the SLOSH maps and surge predictions was key. We considered areas we considered likely to have flooding issues did, and we were monitoring those areas in real time and able to close portions of the roadway as necessary. In some cases, even ahead of the flooding, and we were able to communicate those closures in advance to the public. So for example, by 9 a.m. Monday, well before landfall, but as the weather effects from the hurricane's outer bands were in our area, We identified flooding issues at the entry ramps of exits 4, 13, and 29 on the Parkway down in South Jersey, and the decision was made at that point to close the Parkway in both directions at exit 38 and immediately issue notice to the public regarding the closure. Can you move back one slide? You'll see the Parkway where it's highlighted in red. That illustrates the closure, and on the Turnpike you'll see in red the two areas that illustrate those portions of roadway experienced some closure at some point. Just prior to noon on Monday, we made the call to close the Parkway in both directions, south of exit 63, and at that point, we're already discussing potentially closing the Parkway at exit 129 south, effective at 4 p.m. due to anticipated flooding, and that was all still before the hurricane had even made official landfall. We realized about 90% of our expected surge results from the preparatory work we did. And if you want to see any additional slosh maps or readiness information, evacuation routes, there's a website, www.ready.nj.gov, where you can see maps by counties to give you an idea of the slosh map planning. Staging the equipment based on those projections also enabled us to protect our assets. We moved the equipment out before the storm and got it back afterwards without incident. Can you go ahead 2 slides? Perfect. But for as much as things go well, there are always unanticipated occurrences and room for improvement. Manuals need to be regularly reviewed and updated as appropriate. We have snow manuals that are updated every year, and now we know that all of our other manuals, including hurricane, fog, or business continuity, should be part of that routine regular review and update. Contingency planning, if your workforce can't get to their work locations. During Sandy, we needed to process our payroll, something that could have been done remotely, as it turns out. However, our payroll administrator didn't have power at her home, and her laptop battery wasn't fully charged, so she had to get to the office to get it done. Now, fortunately for us, she was able to get here, but we certainly had plenty of Turnpike Authority employees who lost their own homes or suffered significant damage and couldn't get to work. Prior to the storm, we had fully fueled all of our equipment, including backup generators. However, unexpectedly, the Turnpike Authority's service areas became a lifeline to gas and food services for so many people in those first several days following Hurricane Sandy because, well, quite frankly, we had power and we had fuel. The costs incurred of powering those backup generators for as long as we had to wasn't something we had fully anticipated. So going forward, as we talk about weather, we need to talk about mitigation and sustainability too. You have to consider location of equipment, not only with respect to staging your equipment, but you can't activate backup equipment and generators that are located in basements that are flooded. Perhaps one of the most unique experiences that occurred were the 31 rail totes that floated onto the Turnpike northbound outer roadway in the Carteret area. These rail totes, as you can see in the bottom right picture, essentially look like freight cars, but are cylindrical in shape, and each one had about a 2,000-gallon liquid capacity. Along with these rail cars came a debris field that was piled 7 feet high in some areas of the Turnpike. The removal and cleanup of this gift, as I call it, in the hurricane's wake posed unique cleanup challenges and required incredible coordination between the Turnpike Authority, outside agencies, and the private rail tote owners. First, we had to determine if the totes were filled, and if so, with what, before we could move them. So that required coordination with environmental officials, hazardous material teams, and health and safety. Once it was determined that the totes were in fact empty, we coordinated with our standby wreckers to have the totes towed off the roadway. In terms of overall recovery for the Turnpike Authority, by 9 a.m. the next day after the hurricane, the Garden State Parkway was open in its entirety, including those areas that had been previously closed south of exit 129 in Woodbridge. And by Tuesday afternoon at 4 o'clock, all areas of the Turnpike, including where we had those rail totes in the debris field, were fully open and operational, but for one ramp that had washed out but was rebuilt and opened later that same week. So in essence, within 12 hours of the hurricane moving out of the region, our roads were open and safe for passage, which provided some small level of normalcy in a very devastating time for our region. And our ability to clear the roads and get them open is a credit to our tremendous operations, maintenance, and engineering crews, our preparedness, and our planning. There was no significant damage to our mainline roadway or toll plaza infrastructure, which is a reflection of our state of good repair. And one of our favorite pictures really to come out of this whole experience is the one you see on your screen on the left side with the state police trooper carrying what we now like to call the Turnpike fish. So at this point, I'm going to conclude my remarks and hand it over to Mike for his presentation.
That was a terrific presentation. I really enjoyed it, and as often as I spend time working with highway department customers, I learned some things during that presentation. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
My presentation today is about mitigating weather's extremes and some of the things we can do as a commercial weather service that is targeted to the specific requirements of highway and tollway clients to make your life easier and help you better respond to extreme weather. Now, whether it's Hurricane Sandy or whether it's a blizzard in New England that sets 92 snowfall records in 24 hours, or whether it's a flash flood that washes automobiles and motorists off a tollway into a small creek, every part of the United States has extreme weather. And as you noted, Megan, that extreme weather seems to be coming more frequently recently, and so we all need to prepare for it. The reason the weather seems so extreme, though, isn't entirely because the weather itself is more extreme, but changes in the way we do business increases and multiplies the effect that adverse weather has on our enterprises and on society. For example, 50 years ago, many of us worked in buildings that had windows that opened. You didn't have to have air conditioning. You used a manual typewriter and you used carbon paper to make copies. The telephone switching wasn't done by a computer, but at my dad's car dealership, it was done by a lady in a back room that manually connected the calls, and the telephone network was run on batteries. And so if commercial power failed, you could still make phone calls without any difficulty. Today, that payroll processing is done on a computer. It isn't done manually anymore. We work in offices that have sealed windows, and most all of our typing and copy making is done with computers that require electricity. 50 years ago, this is what a toll booth looked like at the Kansas Turnpike. And I remember when you went through the toll booth, they ran the ticket through this little thing that made a sound like Velcro being separated, and it was all manual. You could take the toll without the need of electricity. Try doing that today. Whether it's the K-tag or the accounting equipment that's in the toll booth, all of this runs on electricity, and so a failure of electricity causes a failure of the business, and costs begin to multiply very, very quickly. Now, as it's been very well publicized, New Jersey Transit, unlike the Turnpike Authority, did not move its equipment during Hurricane Sandy and suffered a loss that's well into...
Hey, Mike,
yes.
This is Pat.
Yes,
We're having a little technical difficulty with your presentation. We can't see your slides.
I'm sorry.
You need to accept as a presenter.
There we go. Are you seeing them now?
Do we see them now?
Yes, he needs to put his PowerPoint together. Great.
Okay, we do see them now, Mike.
Okay, I apologize. I thought I had done that, but apparently not. I apologize for that. We'll go on.
No worries. We're back on track. Thank you, Mike.
You bet, Pat. In addition to New Jersey Transit having more than $100 million loss, a very well-known national company did not realize that their storage area was low, and they had a $73 million fully preventable loss because they failed to move mobile assets. So as Megan so aptly explained, having a plan is absolutely essential to mitigating the effects of extreme weather. And a plan has actually 4 elements to it. One is the plan itself. That's going to vary from toll road to county road to any other type of business. We're not going to sit here and try to explain how to make a plan today. The next part of the plan, though, must include threat communication. How do you let every member of your team know about the threat and get everyone on the same page? Sheltering people and protecting assets, whether it's moving equipment to a higher storage area or putting people in the tornado shelters that are located along the Kansas Turnpike when a tornado threatens. How do you get people and assets into the right place at the right time? And then finally, how do you recover as quickly as possible? Now, you mentioned, Megan, about having to update the plan. One of the things that we offer to our clients is something called SkyGuard Mobile, and it allows you to put the plan onto your smartphone. And if we issue, say, a blizzard warning, the actual steps of the plan come up with the blizzard warning, and it's right there whenever anyone needs it. During Hurricane Sandy, and also during the derecho that moved from Chicago to Washington, D.C. on June 29th, there was a multi-day telephone outage in many areas, including the District of Columbia and some of the suburbs. In one area, there was no 911 service for 7 days and no power for 10 days. How do you communicate to your offices in that type of situation? Well, one of the things we recommend is that you have a satellite phone at your critical locations. For $2,000, you can buy a satellite phone, you can buy an outdoor antenna, and 3 extra batteries that you'll want to keep charged at all times. You'll want to have a minimum monthly plan. If you use a mass communication service like Everbridge, you'll want to put that into the system. You'll want to make an occasional call to keep in practice. Maybe once a month, the system has to be used so everybody remembers how to use it in a critical situation. And then you'll want to program the direct numbers, not the 911 numbers, but numbers like the police, the fire, emergency medical services. Put in the 7 to 10-digit numbers, and that way you'll have communications when other people don't have it. Megan talked about keeping the generators refilled. As you know, that was a huge issue in parts of New Jersey and New York during Hurricane Sandy. Well, one of the things we learned is you can write what's called a premium contract that puts you at the top of the list when it comes to getting your generators refilled. If you're in a hurricane area, you'll want that provider to be at least 200 miles inland. Outside of the hurricane regions, you'll want it at least 100 miles away. You'll have to guarantee a premium transportation rate. That fluctuates with the price of oil. And you'll want it to be with a reputable regional or national company. The people that did that got their generators refilled on a priority basis and did not run out of fuel, whereas the people who were relying on local providers had many of the same problems that the people who owned the generators had. No fuel, they couldn't use their pumps, and therefore they could not serve their customers. Now, when it comes to dealing with extreme weather, some best practices that we've learned over the years, and I've been doing this now for 40 years, believe it or not, is use one source for your weather and storm response. Bring all of your weather information into a single portal so everybody can see what they need to see in one place. And the portal should be available to all of the stakeholders. Again, it's essential for everyone to be on the same page. Now, I realize people are going to say to me, but Mike, you work for a commercial weather company. It would be natural for you to say, use one source. And I realize that. It sounds counterintuitive. It sounds backwards, that the more sources that you have, the better decisions you'll make. Well, in my 40 years, I have found anecdotally that's not true. But now there is scientific research done by the University of East Carolina, Dr. Catherine Smith, who is of no relation to me. She is a social scientist, and she surveyed for 2 years every school district in North and South Carolina about how they made decisions whether to call off school for winter storms. And guess what she found? She found that school districts that had 1 or 2 sources of information about the weather made far better decisions than the ones who used 6 or more sources. The fact is that too many sources can lead to confusion. So you're better off using 1 trusted source, or at most 2, than you are a wide variety of sources. Better decisions are made. Another best practice is, at the appropriate times of year, have refreshers for both employees and for supervisors. We work extensively with Ford Motor Company and the United Auto Workers. In fact, every U.S. automaker is a client of ours. One of the things Ford does is, like in the spring when tornado season is coming up, every employee gets a 1-page pamphlet to remind them about severe weather procedures, and every supervisor gets a different 1-page pamphlet to remind them of their responsibilities and procedures when severe weather occurs. Now, when I was asked to participate in this, one of the things I was asked to cover is what makes a commercial weather service different from the government weather service. Well, more than anything else, the government weather service's mission is to serve everyone equally, whereas a commercial weather service, like AccuWeather Enterprise Solutions, is in business to provide exactly the solutions that clients require. Any warnings for any type of storm are tailored to your unique requirements. Their warnings are issued specifically for the toll roads. We have what we call our preparation time feature that I'll explain in a moment, and we really minimize the false alarms. Now, to give you an example, this is from 2008, and it involved a Caterpillar tractor company in Mississippi. At 5:37, we told them a tornado was headed specifically for their plant and that it would arrive between 5:50 and 6:15. Now, that interval from 5:37 to 5:50 is the preparation time. It lets you know exactly how long you have to prepare before the adverse weather occurs. With government storm warnings, all of the warnings start the moment they are issued, so you don't know how long you have to prepare. As predicted, at 5:59, an F3 tornado hit the plant. The 88 people who were in the plant were all safe and unharmed. They were in shelter. The Wall Street Journal wrote it up as a textbook example of how a business should handle extreme weather. The government's tornado warning for this location came out 4 minutes after the tornado struck. When it comes to a toll road, let's take this example. If we issue the warning at 4 o'clock, we'll issue the warning based on mileposts. We do that for the Kansas Turnpike, PennDOT, and another number of other transportation organizations. But in this case, the warning might be in effect from 4:12 to 4:30, so you know exactly from milepost 20 to milepost 26 how long you have before the potential threat arrives. So you know you have 12 minutes to get the people in position to block the roadway and to get people out of the path of the tornado. Now, Megan mentioned that they were working with hydrologists to know how high the water was going to get. We express our flood warnings in terms of above flood stage, and in this era of GPS, we also express it in terms of height above sea level, so you know exactly where we expect the water to go, how high it's going to get, and it saves you that step of trying to figure it out for yourselves. Winter storms, we have the ability to put extremely precise information on your smartphone. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. So the advantage of working with a commercial weather company is many fewer false alarms, the messaging tailored to your unique business requirements, and the final example I'd like to give is we work with many surface transportation companies. We have an 87% market share of railroads in North America. The BNSF Railway cares intensely about floods, as a toll road would, because the roadbed of the railroad or the concrete of the highway could be washed out. Whereas Spirit AeroSystems, maker of 737s, doesn't care about flash floods. They're on high ground. But you see those two 737 fuselages at the bottom? If it hails, that's a $10 to $20 million loss. Now, BNSF Railway serves Spirit AeroSystems. You see the arrows pointing to their track at the upper right. In this particular case, both are clients of ours, but they have different business requirements. The railroad cares about flash flooding. Spirit does not. Spirit cares about hail. The railroad does not. So they each get warnings that are tailored to their specific needs. We can also trigger signage to give weather alerts for specific locations. In fact, we provide kiosks to the Kansas Turnpikes at their service area that shows exactly on a milepost to milepost basis where hazardous weather is going to occur. And then finally, our new SkyGuard Mobile, which is a GPS-powered device that will tell you where along the highway adverse weather is going to occur, but it will also give you a lightning warning at your kid's soccer game. This is something that we're extremely proud of and excited about because for the first time, the weather's going to follow you and get you the information that you need to know. Now at the bottom is our website, my email address, and phone number. And please feel free to contact me at any time if you have any questions that you think of after the webinar is over. And thank you so much for inviting me today.
Mike, thank you very much. What an excellent presentation and very eye-opening for me as well. And Megan, thanks to you for your excellent presentation. We have some questions coming in from folks who are using the dialog box on the right-hand side of the screen. One of the questions relates to the processes involved in establishing protocols with local and state governments to coordinate the response to natural disasters. Megan, you touched on this in your presentation, and Mike, you did as well. Could you each elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. Mike, if you don't mind, I'll just take a first response at it.
Go ahead.
So that's all part of that interagency planning that I talked about. So in those days leading up, we were not only doing our internal coordination amongst our departments, but we were participating in conference calls with other agencies. You know, Transcom, which is a organization that has 16 transportation area organizations, members of it, provides shared information to everybody. So if the George Washington Bridge, we might hear from the Port Authority that they were having wind issues, Transcom would also disseminate that information. So there's some level of coordination that's going on by talking to your sister agencies. From the state level, you know, state police and the Office of Emergency Management were running the response. So we made sure to participate in their conversations, in their phone calls, in their planning, so that we could say, hey, Turnpike Authority has this covered or needs to do this. And then on the local level, when I talked about those closures, you know, prior to the storm making landfall, we used our VMS signs up and down the roadway to provide hurricane warning notices, or if there were road closures, we'd activate signs to indicate as such. But then when you lose power to the sign, what do? We had to get word out to the locals. So we had people that were dedicated to calling local leaders and officials. So if we were going to close an area or section of roadway, we had people that were responsible for then immediately notifying local people on the ground, so that they could help get that message out. So those are just a couple of the you know, planning tools we used in terms of talking to other agencies and being coordinated outside of our agency.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Please contribute to this.
More in the derecho of June 29th than in Sandy, a lot of local governments lost telephone capability. A surprising number lost capability. That's where I came up with the idea of using a satellite phone and doing the research as to how much they cost. I think that if you lose communications, you're already far behind in terms of coordination. And while $2,000, and by the way, I have no stock, I have no interest whatsoever in satellite telephone companies, but you can get a basic plan for about $70 a month. You can do a one-time charge of about $2,000 to be able to ensure communications in a critical extreme weather situation. That seems to me to be a good investment.
Pat, can I add one thing to follow up?
Please.
Where
Yeah, please.
And it's part of the planning, but it's also then speaks to a little bit of lessons learned and that power issue, because really that was what we were up against, was the wide, massive power outages and getting information to people. And when I spoke of the fact that we lost power to our signs and the ability to communicate with them, that's an area that in those days following, our technology and operations crew immediately started examining potential remedies to it, including installation of generators at the signs. Some of our newer signs already have the generator capability, so it's a question of just hooking that up. Some of them putting a generator there, or alternative sources of energy. And another thing we noticed was people don't have power. Their computer wouldn't work necessarily, but their smartphone would work. So social media became a resource, and just yesterday we launched a Facebook page for the Turnpike Authority that obviously we hope to not have a hurricane that we have to communicate with people again anytime soon. But in the event that we need to communicate to patrons, which service areas are open, when, with fuel, those types of things, we could use those social media platforms, because it seems that that's how a lot of people were communicating in the absence of your standard type of power in the home or office place.
Thank you, Megan and Mike. Megan, we have a multi-part question here for you. First part is, how do you prepare for post-event inspection? And the next part is, when were the tolls reinstated, and what criteria did you use to reinstate the tolls?
Okay. So with respect to post-event inspection, that kind of speaks to when I talked about, the storm is happening, you're just waiting it out. That's when you really have your crews on standby, ready to get out. And we have our operations center, but we also have maintenance yards located up and down both roadways. So you have people out on the roadways. You have your engineering teams. You have your contractors ready to go. And they go out and they have to do an evaluation and an inspection. And once they come back with that information, that's when you can make larger scale recommendations, openings, as it pertains to even something like toll collection. For that toll collection question, with respect to the Parkway, as I mentioned, we suspended toll collection Sunday about 6 a.m. day prior to the hurricane in that northbound section of roadway. By 5 p.m. Monday, which was about an hour before the projected landfall of the eye of the storm, that's when we pulled everybody off the road, suspended toll collection, both roadways, full lengths of the roadway. Storm moves out by 2 o'clock on Tuesday. We had resumed toll collection on the Parkway because it was open in its entirety. There were no issues, and the toll plazas, the infrastructure was stable. We had power. We could do it from a electronic perspective. And on the Turnpike, we resumed toll collection about 6:30 Wednesday morning. And that, again, you have to look at, is the whole road open? Do we have technology and power to the toll plazas? Is the infrastructure safe for our people to be in it? And those are some of the parameters by which you use to guide those decisions.
Thanks, Megan.
Sure.
Mike, we have another question for you.
Okay.
What weather event has the least amount of preparation or lead time, and what is the one that is hardest to plan for?
Let me answer that by geography. In the central United States, tornadoes have a reputation of being the hardest to forecast, but that's not the case anymore. for any kind of significant tornado these days, you almost always get a tornado watch followed by a tornado warning. And so they're not as difficult as they used to be. In the central United States, the most difficult thing is amount of snow accumulation. Not whether it's going to snow, we got that down pretty cold these days. But the amount of snow can be difficult. In the eastern United States, the amount of snow is actually a little bit easier than it is in the central United States. But in the east, the most difficult storm to forecast is the rare derechos like the one that occurred on the 29th of June. As you know, there were parts of western Virginia and West Virginia that were without power for 3 weeks. And while there were severe thunderstorm watches out in advance, the rapid intensification of that storm was difficult to anticipate. So I would say that a derecho is probably the most difficult item in the eastern United States to forecast. In the central United States, it's the amount of snow at a given point.
Thank you, Mike. Here's another one for probably both of you. To the extent that the toll agency was better prepared than other local governments, how did you consider sharing resources after the fact, like fuel and those kinds of things? Megan?
Well, I wouldn't say it was a sharing resources with the fuel in the sense what we had worked out prior to the hurricane as part of our preparedness planning was working with Sunoco, who is our fuel service provider at the service areas on the roadway, to make sure that they had the ability to get us fuel. We did that in advance, and that turned out to be very beneficial because we had the power to be able to fuel the pumps. When so many gas stations in the area, they had fuel, they had no power, so they couldn't gas up cars. In terms of if there were roads nearby that we had equipment to help clear, whether it's ramps or those types of things, as long as we had our roads clear, open, functioning, that was our first priority. You know, the fuel, we were able to get it into the state. That was critical too. We're a helpful agency. So to the extent that whether it's snow, it's a hurricane, if we have the ability, once we know there's no issue on our roadway, we would then have that internal discussion. And those are usually actually conversations that come directly to the executive director from whether it's the head of another state agency or a local official who calls the agency and says, this is where we're in need of assistance. Do you have the ability to help? And then that's when we have to take stock of what the situation we have is, where our resources are, and make an assessment and decision from there.
All right. Very good. Go ahead, Mike.
A comment that I would make is meteorology is rapidly getting the ability now to tell you where the worst damage has occurred even while the storm is in progress. The new techniques of what are called dual polarization radar added on to Doppler radar can often tell where the highest winds have been, where the largest hail has been, and therefore where the greatest damage has occurred. So we can usually tell you that between milepost 50 and 60, that's where the winds were highest, and that's where I deploy resources first to look for, if the road has not been closed, motorists who might be in trouble, any power poles blocking the road, that sort of thing. So you can use the meteorologist as a resource to help you coordinate your response, because we usually have a pretty good idea these days of where the greatest damage potential was geographically. We live in this GIS world, and we now have the ability to give you everything in a GIS layer or in terms of mileposts.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. We have another question. This really drills down into the whole question of communication. Mm-hmm. Question is, how can toll agencies best communicate to patrons whether tolls have been suspended or if toll payment is required. There was a lot of confusion during the Sandy relief effort where patrons were not aware of tolling requirements among the various agencies. The writer of the question suggests there needs to be better coordination of information to the entities that are part of an emergency relief effort. What do you think, Megan?
And that's actually something in post-Sandy discussions we've talked about, whether it was after Irene in 2011 or Sandy most recently, we sit down as an agency and do these post-storm reviews, departmental debrief sessions to identify lessons learned or improvement in best practices, whatever the case may be. And one of the things, particularly after Sandy, that came up with respect to the toll-free passage issue is trying to coordinate some sort of protocol, procedure, agreement, whatever you want to call it, among your sister toll agencies as to the process you're going to employ when handling toll-free passage, whether it's to communicate it to the patrons or if you're waiving tolls for first responders and utility companies from out of area. We had plenty of power companies, tree service companies, fire, first aid that were coming into the region, and we waived tolls for them. So some of that is internally communicating it to make sure that all the toll plazas know that. We used signs when available. And then we did talk to other agencies to say, this is what we're doing, this is when we're doing it. But it's an area of continued, I think, improvement and for the coordination perspective alone. Some of that, too, is, like I said, social media, I think, would be helpful going forward. So we could post some sort of message out there, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever the case may be, tolls suspended on the Garden State Parkway in advance of hurricane warning, whatever it would be. I think that's something that's going to be looked at going forward, but then also trying to have some sort of procedure or protocol. We obviously have one internally, but then working with sister agencies so that everybody's on the same page.
All right, thank you, Megan. Mike, we have a question about storm tracking here and also related to communications. Reports from Florida noted that the best forecasts don't always reflect the track or course of the actual weather event, and that contact with staff in remote locations is a very valuable to properly assess. Thoughts about that, Mike, and the communication needs, for outlying regions?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Florida has a type of radar that is hardly used. It's called Terminal Doppler Weather Radar, and it's installed at the airports at, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and Miami, and it actually shows weather conditions in some of those remote areas better than the typical National Weather Service radar that you see on your 6 and 10 o'clock or 6 and 11 o'clock newscasts. That is available to some of the private sector weather companies, and it's extremely valuable in some of these remote areas. Now, that said, radar doesn't do everything, and training your people in remote areas to be your eyes and ears is a very important asset. The National Weather Service usually makes, at least in the central United States and much of the East, makes rounds to most cities in the spring to do spotter training, how to visually locate a tornado or a supercell thunderstorm, how to report hail accurately, how to report snow depths accurately. It probably is a good idea to have some of your people take that no-charge training so that they can be more effective at reporting the ground truth in remote areas.
Thank you, Mike.
Could I just add something?
Yes.
In talking to remote locations? New
Please.
Jersey isn't necessarily, it's not that our maintenance yards are in remote locations, but it speaks to that power issue too, because if you lose power and your cell phones aren't working, we have a radio system. So we have radios located in our maintenance yards that connect to our operations center. Now, fortunately, our operations center has a backup generator, redundancy, all those important things. And we were on generator power at our operations center for a portion of the evening when the worst of the storm was here. But we do have that portable radio system, so there's radios out to the maintenance yards, so they're able to get in touch with our operations center, and likewise our operations center, if they're getting notification of something, can radio into the maintenance yard personnel to speak to them. And that's maybe something, you know, the lessons learned you talk about looking forward, the value of that system and maybe expanding it. Who is it appropriate to have on portable radio? So just something for thought in the conversation.
Very good. Thank you very much. Another takeaway, another question from areas that have been hit by hurricanes recently, Florida and the Gulf Coast, is the decision not to send staff into harm's way, that they wait for safe conditions and then send staff to assess damage, etc., and recovery efforts. What criteria do you use to determine when it's time to pull back staff and not send them into harm's way?
I usually, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mike.
I usually counsel people that when the sustained winds, as you mentioned it earlier, get above about 35 miles an hour or gusts to 45 to 50 miles an hour, you need to get your people out of there. We don't want the first responders, and we certainly don't want the maintenance and other staff people hurt. So those seem to be pretty good wind thresholds. In terms of lightning, we now have the ability, when I say we, I mean weather science, to give point lightning warnings. So you want to have at least 5 minutes warning of lightning to let people get back in their trucks. Their trucks are safe. Being outdoors during lightning is a bad idea. And then in terms of hail, below 1 inch just doesn't cause any harm. But when the hail is above 1 inch in diameter, people can be injured, in some cases seriously. So I would use 1 inch as the threshold for pulling people into their trucks or indoors for hail.
Mm-hmm. And just to echo what Mike said, you know, the sustained winds, with respect to a hurricane, the sustained winds piece of it, or the high gusts, is usually what we would look at to make a decision. We have our kind of inclement weather hazard assessment, so whether it's winds or some other weather element, we have some of those standards built in. With the hurricane, it was largely the sustained winds. I will say also, just from a customer and traveler perspective, we were very aggressive in our prior notification to people that this hurricane was coming. It was for real, not only as an agency, but you know, from a state government, local government perspective, but we used every available resource, whether it was our website or the VMS roadway signage, to get advance warning to people that this storm was coming and they should take notice of it. So by the time that we were really feeling the effects of the outer bands of the hurricane and then the actual eye of the hurricane passing through the region, we had, fortunately, we had very few people on the roadway.
Megan Mulcahy, Mike Smith, thank you very much for your expertise and your participation today. This is excellent. The presentations and your responses to the questions, very well done. As I mentioned at the outset, we will be posting the slides and the audio from this presentation to our website before the end of the day. We want to remind you that our next major event is the Transportation Finance and Mileage-Based User Fee Symposium, April 14 through 16 in Philadelphia. You can find information about that event and all IBTTA events on our website. Please watch your email to receive a survey about today's webinar. We want to thank you again for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Megan and Mike, thank you again for your excellent presentations. And for IBTTA, this is Pat Jones signing off. Thanks again.